2023 has come to a close, and I thought I'd take some time to do a sort of channel update slash 2023 favorites slash thank you video to start the year off right. Channels that cover their favorite media like me typically do a ranking of their favorite things that came out at the end of a given year or the start of the next one, and while I'm not really a top 10 ranking kind of guy, I do want to highlight, in no particular order, some stuff that released in 2023 that I thought was pretty cool that I may or may not have had the opportunity to talk about on the channel yet. Specifically, I'm going to be covering some video games and films. Right off the bat, obviously I haven't experienced everything that was released this year. Here are some things that I haven't gotten to yet. The cool thing about this channel, though, is that you are all so great with leaving recommendations that if there's something that I don't highlight in this section that you think I'd really enjoy, please let me know. I do add things to my watch list from the comment section. Actually, before I start, I know that a lot of you are anime fans. Friends, I need some help. This year I was seriously not keeping up with anime. Whether it was watching new series that were released or catching up with new seasons, I am just so far behind and I'm ashamed of myself for it. So let me have it in the comments. Give me those recommendations, tell me what to watch, and I will check them out. New Year's resolution for 2024, watch more anime, and with your help, I know I can do it. Alright, without further ado, Mason's favorite things from 2023. First, I'd like to talk about some video games. Even though I was pretty late to the party, having only started playing it after all the hype and its big Game Awards sweep, Baldur's Gate 3 delivers on all that hype. There are so many options, so many ways to approach any obstacle, so many dialogue choices. The freedom is there for you to craft a story that feels as customizable as a real tabletop D&D session. As someone who has been playing weekly D&D games for a few years now, the mechanics are very familiar yet also accessible to someone who may not have any experience with tabletop RPGs. If you haven't tried it yet, trust me, Baldur's Gate 3 is absolutely worth it. This might have been my personal favorite game of the year if I didn't absolutely obsess over Resident Evil 4's remake the way that I did when it dropped. You know that you've done a good job remaking a game when I actually recommend both versions to people who haven't played either. If you're a fan of the original game, you'll appreciate that they left in a lot of the over-the-top charm while also making the gameplay still feel so satisfying. I also really appreciate the improvement on the character of Ashley, making her far less whiny and much more likable. It may not be an improvement on every single aspect of the original game, especially for diehard fans, but I had so much fun with this game that I just didn't want to stop playing. I wanted to keep going, and nowadays it's hard for a game to keep me playing for so many hours. For that, RE4 Remake is my personal favorite game that I got to play in 2023. It's also worth mentioning that God of War Ragnarok released a free DLC called Valhalla a few days after the Game Awards. One of the things that amazes me about the God of War series is just how far the character of Kratos has come since the original trilogy. The 2018 game and Ragnarok both fully transformed this man from a vengeful monster into a hopeful hero wanting to make the world a better place for his son, and the Valhalla DLC serves as this nice coda to that story arc for Kratos. I'm probably going to do a video about this at some point in the future, but I'm so blown away by how video games are able to capture emotional performances with in-game character models. The best moments of not just Valhalla, but also Ragnarok are the subtle facial expressions and mannerisms that Christopher Judge gives to Kratos in these really vulnerable scenes. Valhalla truly delivered as a DLC in this regard. One more game I'm gonna mention that I've been having an absolute blast with is Lethal Company. My brothers and I have put many hours into this now, and it's a game that manages to be both hilarious and terrifying at the same time. The game has this sort of tongue-in-cheek satirical tone with plenty of jokes about being a slave to a massive corporation. One minute you're laughing with your brother about how you found an air horn or a Rubik's Cube, and then all of a sudden your brother abruptly stops laughing, you're left in total silence, and now this is the scariest game ever made. If you've got a good group of friends, definitely get them together to play some Lethal Company. Hopefully you also have an organized, professional, and respectable crew like my brothers. Alright, now let's talk about movies. Again, I'm not organizing this in any particular order, it's not a ranking in any way. These are just some standouts from this year that I really had a good time with in some cases, and absolutely loved in others. It was a pretty great year for fun movies. Movies to go see with your family and friends for a good time. Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 was, as I said in my Mission Impossible video, just as entertaining as you would expect. It'll never not be a blast to see what Tom Cruise is going to jump off of when one of these things releases. And with this being a part 1, I can only imagine what they're going to do in part 2. I don't think it was as good as Mission Impossible Fallout, but I did like the homage the film paid to the original Brian De Palma film, with the character of Kittredge returning. Mission Impossible has always been a franchise that I enjoy to go watch with my 2 adult brothers and my parents. The movies that I love to go watch with my younger brothers are movies like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem. What makes Mutant Mayhem work is that, like all great animation, it works well for younger audiences as well as adult fans of the franchise like myself. One of my favorite things that I own is this animation cell of Splinter from the original 80s animated series. I'm a fan, and this movie did the franchise and this character justice. In this movie, Splinter was one of the biggest highlights for me, with Jackie Chan bringing a really sweet interpretation of this character, just looking out for his sons. While I didn't love every single element of this movie, the interactions between the Turtles, April, and Splinter made the whole thing worthwhile. That and the excellent animation. It's a real treat to look at, with a very stylized New York and some very impressive action scenes set to a badass soundtrack. A movie that really surprised me in 2023 was Dungeons & Dragons: Honor Among Thieves. I saw this with my D&D group, fully expecting it to be average at best, but it actually managed to be a pretty damn good time. The cast work well off of one another, sometimes capturing that chaotic energy of a real D&D party. The comedy was surprisingly very effective at times, with some scenes that caught me way off guard. Most impressive of all, at least for me, was the implementation of practical creature effects as often as they could. There was still plenty of CG, but where they could use an animatronic creature, they actually did. There was a clear love and passion for the RPG that inspired this film, and if this is the beginning of a new franchise, I'd be happy to see where it goes. One more thing, Jarnathan is the greatest character in the film, and if they make a sequel, he'd better be in it. Horror had a pretty great run this past year, with some even yielding some higher than expected box office returns, which as a genre fan makes me pretty happy. I always love to see when horror is successful in the mainstream, even if it's produced for a very low budget. In my Darkness video, I talked about Skinamarink, one of my favorite horror films of the year. I'm so glad that everyone agrees with me that this movie is great and nobody has any issues with it at all. In all seriousness, even if you didn't like Skinamarink as much as I did, and you're a horror fan, I'd say it was still a pretty great year.
You don't look so good, Mom.
Nothing a big ol' hug and kiss from you won't fix. Open up now.
Evil Dead Rise brought the series' iconic formula out of the woods and into a high-rise apartment building, while still retaining the creative camera work, insane practical gore, and strangely attractive possessed women that the franchise is known for. What really grabbed me about Rise was just how attached I got to this family. Each actor gave it their all, and there wasn't a single weak performance from any of them. While it still has that rainy, dark comedy you'd expect, this movie isn't afraid to rip your heart out by killing off some pretty young characters you grow attached to. It also has the most badass title card of the year. If you asked me to pick my favorite horror film of 2023, I think I'd have to give it to something I've already made a video on and have no problem revisiting.
It never gets old.
Talk to Me is just that good. One of the strongest debut features of the year, and a disturbingly real look at peer pressure in the social media age, as well as how grief can drive us to make terrible decisions. Like Evil Dead Rise, Talk to Me is elevated by its strong characters, each performed with such honesty. They act like real high schoolers, so when they're hurled into this violent, horrifying world, it's so easy to sympathize with them. This is one of those horror films that benefits from a second viewing. and has an ending that stuck with me for a while after it was over. If the concept and horrifying reality that a film presents can keep you up at night, that's the sign of a great horror film. I'm eager to see what the confirmed sequel has to offer to this world and concept. If you've seen my video on it already, I don't think you'll be surprised by my favorite animated film of 2023.
All stations, drop what you're doing and stop Spider-Man.
Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse is one of those works of art that challenges an entire industry to do better, to look at their output and question why they aren't of this level of quality in visuals, story, character, and especially soundtrack. It's one of those animated films that gets nearly everybody talking. You simply had to see it to believe it. That hasn't happened with a Western animation since, well, the first one. I can't imagine being tasked to follow up a bona fide animated masterpiece with something that tops nearly everything it did right, but they somehow did it here. Obviously, I'm not so patiently awaiting the third film as I'm sure all of you are, and I can't help but have confidence that they'll end this series in a way that cements it as one of the greatest achievements in not just animation, but filmmaking history. With that said though, I think it's important to take a moment to address something about Spider-Verse that came to light shortly after my original video on it. There were several reports of the animators being treated unfairly, with approximately 100 artists leaving the production. In 2023, we saw the writers and actors seek to make improvements to the working conditions of those who make our entertainment. And I feel that the animation industry should come together to seek better treatment themselves, as well as the visual effects and gaming industries, so we can stop wondering if the entertainment that we love is made by people who are being exploited. These are the artists that are devoting their time and energy to give us amazing art, and creating that art shouldn't be a miserable experience. Despite the production issues, Across the Spider-Verse is an amazing film, and I hope that those who worked on it can be proud of their work, because it is some of the best I've ever seen from every department. Daniel Pemberton's score might be my pick for the best score of the year, although it's in serious competition with another score that I'll get to later. I'm absolutely addicted to listening to it as much as I am to rewatching this movie. An incredible audiovisual experience.
I don't like the way that guy looked at us.
Okay.
The alien.
Wes Anderson has always been a director that has never feared the artificial nature of filmmaking. Realism has never really been what he's going for, which makes it even more profound when the themes of his films get more real than most. Asteroid City is a metatextual film about a story being told about the telling of a story where the players within the story are trying to understand the story. It might be tough to follow for some, and I can't help but feel that that's the point. To me, Anderson is saying that while it is fun to analyze and form our own interpretations of art by seeking to understand it, it's also okay to not fully understand it. There's a dialogue exchange toward the end of the film that I'm sure most of you are aware of by now, that not only touches on this idea, but in a way moves past fictional stories and into real life. We may not always get what's going on or why things happen in the world around us, but we can keep going. If you're into video essays like I am and want to see someone explore Asteroid City a little more after you watch it, I highly recommend Thomas Flight's video on it, as well as all of his other Wes Anderson videos. They are fantastic, and I think Asteroid City is the Anderson film that benefits from the kinds of discussions that these videos create the most. It's a very weird little movie, and looking back, 2023 was definitely a year for weird movies, both big and little. Ari Aster's Beau is Afraid is a movie that I think most knew wasn't going to do well in theaters financially, but the fact that it actually got a wide release is a big deal. There isn't one moment in the film where it feels like Aster had to compromise his vision. A lot of that comes from the fact that he directed the most financially successful A24 film until Everything Everywhere All at Once. This gave him a lot of free rein to do whatever he wanted, and he chose to make a bizarre, at times absolutely horrific, yet somehow darkly hilarious exploration of guilt, paranoia, and anxiety, helmed by the one and only Joaquin Phoenix, who really brings it as Bo. The cinematography, production design, and hair and makeup are all excellent, showing off the higher than normal budget for an A24 movie. Both sitting in the theater for the first time and rewatching it at home, I was convinced that Beau is Afraid was going to be the only wide release that got this strange, but as someone who loves weird-ass movies, I was blessed with yet another project from an artsy weirdo that I've become a huge fan of. It was actually the last movie that I saw in 2023.
Understand, me never lived outside God's house.
What?
So Bella's so much to discover, and your sad face makes me discover angry feelings for you.
Right.
I really like to imagine that a young couple, maybe fans of Emma Stone, walked into Poor Things not knowing what it was going to be and expecting it to be a good date movie, only to be subjected to the surreal genius of Yorgos Lanthimos. I think it's appropriate that Variety paired both Lanthimos and Ari Aster together for their most recent Directors on Directors interview, because they're two of the most talented weirdos to somehow get their names out there into the mainstream. Poor Things has a lot of the elements that you can usually find in Lanthimos' work, but on a much larger scale, and somehow even funnier than his previous efforts. I found myself laughing out loud many times in the theater from just how bluntly Emma Stone delivered these absurd lines of dialogue. Her character is someone who has no real concept of societal norms, so whatever comes to her mind, she'll just blurt out. Of course, as is common in this director's work, characters rarely ever react to what she says in a realistic way. The director likes to show you an absurdist world that can sometimes look very close to our own in films like Killing of a Sacred Deer or The Lobster, but here he fully embraces the science fiction fantasy with crazy architecture, wild costumes, and horrific makeup. Emma Stone is phenomenal in this movie, giving my personal favorite of all of her performances so far, taking us on a journey with this strange character who's just trying to figure out everything about herself and the world around her. Pair her with Mark Ruffalo, who's matching her insanity perfectly, and you've got a hell of a weird ride. I had so much fun with this movie. Of course, I can't not bring up what was easily the biggest cinematic event of 2023. The release of both Barbie and Oppenheimer on the same day, and the cultural excitement that formed around that, was one of the most fun movie experiences I've had in a long time. Seeing both of these films back to back on the same day was an absolute blast, no pun intended, and I went into a pretty good amount of detail in my video on the phenomenon. I recommend checking that out if you want to hear more of what I think about Barbie and Oppenheimer.
You're so beautiful. I know it.
What really struck me about both of these films, though, was just how important the vision of their directors was to how they turned out. Greta Gerwig and Christopher Nolan made these films their own, in a time when it feels like a lot of mainstream movies are both written and directed by committee. It's hard to identify the artist behind the 500th superhero film, but Gerwig imbued what is essentially a Mattel commercial with so much heart and meaning that it's hard to imagine being pulled off by anyone else.
Our work here will ensure a peace mankind has never seen. A peace based on the kind of international cooperation that Roosevelt always envisaged.
Nolan, on the other hand, took what could have been a boring biopic and elevated it to a near mythical exploration of the man who doomed the world, exploring both the man and the consequences of his actions in a nuanced, haunting manner. This is one of those movies that I feel lucky that I got to see on a massive screen in a packed theater. The soundtrack, competing with Spider-Verse as my best of the year, is ever present and exhilarating, taking each small or large story moment that much further. I won't spend too much time on it here because, again, I already have a video on it that I do recommend you check out, but if I was to choose one movie out of every one that I talk about and select it as my best of 2023, Oppenheimer might be the one. Depending on the day. That's just how good this year was.
What's your relationship like with him and your other kids?
How is that relevant?
It's my understanding that the movie takes place between 1992 and 1994. Am I wrong? So why would you need to know anything that happened after that?
May December is a movie that made me feel sick. The subject matter is so uncomfortable, so perverse and wrong, yet it manages to provoke this reaction out of me without ever showing anything seriously graphic. It lets the performances of its incredible cast do the heavy lifting. It follows a woman who engaged in an inappropriate relationship with a minor whom she later married when she was released from prison, and the actress who is going to play her in an upcoming adaptation of her story. While Julianne Moore and Natalie Portman are both acting at the top of their game, the most compelling and, in my opinion, award-worthy performance in the film comes from Charles Melton. The emotional pain that this film inflicts on its audience is delivered via his subtle, heartbreaking line delivery. May December itself may not be exploitative of these kinds of situations that do occur in real life, but it is about exploitation. How the world of entertainment looks at the real-life abusers and victims as nothing more than a story to sell. Not a life, but a life story. There are some lines of dialogue here where the implications are so awful that you almost can't believe they were just spoken so casually. Todd Haynes directs the film in a very unique way. At first, the style may be a bit confusing, especially the choices made in regards to the musical score, but I promise that if you stick with it and pick up on what Haynes is trying to say, it'll all make sense. And now from the quietly devastating to the loudly devastating. Believe the hype. Godzilla Minus One is that good. This might be a topic that I'll expand upon in the future video, but one of my favorite things about Godzilla and why I'm such a big fan is that you can have the best of both worlds with him. You can have him dropkick and body slam other giant monsters like a pro wrestler, and you can have him be the symbolic representation of the post-World War II horrors that Japan faced following the dropping of the atomic bombs. Godzilla Minus One is a return to the post-World War II setting, and doesn't give us the first compelling human characters in one of these movies like the internet would have you believe, but it does give us probably the best human characters in any of these movies. Godzilla himself is the most menacing he has been since Shin Godzilla, but far less sympathetic. He is a force of nature to be reckoned with here, and watching the people come together to stop him after their government has failed to do so is some of the most exciting cinema I experienced all year. The fact that a Godzilla film is even on the shortlist for the Oscars is one of the craziest things to come from a year as crazy as 2023. And as many have pointed out, Minus One managed to accomplish all of this on a less than $15 million budget. Sometimes you come across a movie that connects with you on a personal level. Something within its story, themes, or characters resonates with an element of your real life, thus making it that much more affecting of an experience. The Iron Claw isn't a movie about professional wrestling as much as it is a movie about brothers who engage in professional wrestling in order to grow even closer to one another while under the manipulative, jealous, and controlling presence of their family patriarch. The story of the Von Erichs is well known amongst die-hard wrestling fans. I myself am only a casual fan and only knew somewhat of what happened going in. As someone who cherishes my relationship with my brothers so deeply, watching these tragic real-life events unfold on screen was very difficult. Zac Efron gives a career-best performance as Kevin Von Erich, and there is a particular line delivery at the end that got the tears flowing for me. Check it out whether you're a wrestling fan or not, but be prepared to cry. Also, just a side note, the Iron Claw has, without a doubt, the best needle drop of the year. A wrestling montage set to a song by the greatest band in the universe. It's like the movie wanted to win me over specifically.
Storm, it's powerful. So we need to be quiet for a while.
Remember earlier in the video when I said that depending on the day, Oppenheimer is my favorite film of 2023? Well, Killers of the Flower Moon is my favorite on the other day. Martin Scorsese is a legendary filmmaker for a reason. He's been telling this story of the evil, corruption, and excess that has existed within American culture since its foundation throughout his entire career. And Killers of the Flower Moon, like The Irishman, acts as a dreadful, quiet meditation on that evil. The atrocities committed against the Native American Osage by the men who wanted their land is particularly devastating because it isn't carried out by the usual gangster tough guy or mastermind that we would normally see in a Scorsese film. Leonardo DiCaprio's character is unintelligent, easily manipulated, clumsily carries out orders handed down to him by a not much smarter man, yet is still able to do what he does because the system is rigged in his favor. This is the evil built within the DNA of our very nation, and it is most dreadful when Scorsese turns the camera toward the character of Molly. Lily Gladstone is pitch perfect. In scenes where she's acting opposite DiCaprio and De Niro, she still confidently commands every single moment. Her character is one of great presence, mystery, and eventually sadness. Easily the greatest performance in the movie. When it comes to picking my favorite films of any given year, I often go with the ones that emotionally affected me the most. The ones that left me speechless while the credits rolled and had me going to bed that night thinking about them over and over. Killers of the Flower Moon has one of those endings that just ties the whole thing together. The entire experience is brilliant, but that ending just takes it a step further. It's unbelievable that such a legendary filmmaker can still find new ways to blow our minds. If you haven't seen Killers of the Flower Moon, or any of the movies that I've talked about here, I highly recommend that you do, and let me know in the comments what your favorite things that came out of 2023 were. So, those were my favorite movies and video games that came out in 2023. What I'd like to do now is take a look back at my channel and all that happened in regards to that in 2023. I started 2023 with a little over 800 subscribers. That number is now at 15,000. Yeah, I'm still absolutely floored by that. It's crazy to me that so many of you are interested in what I have to say in regards to animation, horror movies, video games, the Alvin and the Chipmunks Meet the Wolfman movie. It truly means the world to me that so many of you not only subscribe, but leave such nice comments. There was a time early in 2023 when I went through one of the hardest things I've ever been through emotionally. I won't go into too much detail, but the hardest thing about 2023 was losing a family member. Someone that I was very close to who always encouraged me, inspired me, and was one of my biggest fans, they would say. They passed right before the channel had a huge jump from 1,000 to thousands of subscribers due to the animated villains video doing insanely well, and my emotions were kind of all over the place during that time. The reason I'm bringing all this up is because I just want you all to know that if you left a nice comment or just liked one of my videos, that really meant a whole lot to me while I was processing this grief. You truly helped me during one of the hardest points in my life. I'm very lucky to have not only an audience that is so supportive, but also family and friends that encourage this silly hobby that has gone so far beyond what I ever expected. I've talked about my favorite movies and games this year, but if I had to pick my favorite of my own videos that I made in 2023, I'd have to actually go with one that doesn't have the views of something like Animated Villains or Hellfire, but does have some personal significance to me. My Comfort Movies is my favorite video that I made in 2023 because it was the first video that I wrote after going through that loss. At the time, I was watching things that always brought me joy because that was what I needed. Just making that video was very helpful, and the comments that I received on it, in addition to all the other comments I was getting that were so kind, that really meant something to me. With all that said, I want to close out 2023 by saying something that I've said a whole lot and will continue to say. Thank you. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for liking. Thank you for commenting. And thank you for just watching my videos. I have so many plans for 2024, so many videos that I'm very hyped for you to see. Again, leave me your recommendations in the comments. Tell me your 2023 favorites. Go check out my Patreon if you wish to support the channel even more, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you.